There is a comforting belief people like to hold on to, that human beings are fair, rational, kind, that beneath everything, people mean well. And for a long time, that belief feels true, because in ordinary moments, it is. People are polite, they smile, they follow rules, they say the right things. And so it becomes easy to assume that this is who they are. But human nature isn't revealed in comfort. It's revealed in contrast, in pressure, in competition, in moments where something is at stake. And when those moments arrive, something begins to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to notice. Because beneath social behavior, there are older patterns at work, patterns shaped long before modern life existed, instincts not built for fairness, but for survival. And survival does not always look like kindness. It looks like self-preservation. This is why people often act differently than they believe they would. Because what we say we value and what we do under pressure are not always the same. And the space between those two things is where human nature becomes visible. People like to think of themselves as generous, and sometimes they are. But when something becomes limited, when recognition is scarce, when opportunities begin to feel uncertain, something else appears, quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, self-interest. Not in a cruel or obvious way, but in small decisions. Who gets priority? Who gets attention? Who gets left behind? And most of the time, it isn't even noticed, because the mind is always evaluating what benefits me, what protects me, what moves me forward. And once those questions are answered, behavior follows. Even when it contradicts what someone believes about themselves, this is where things begin to feel different. Because success doesn't exist in isolation. It creates comparison. And comparison is rarely comfortable. It forces a question most people don't want to sit with. Where do I stand? And when the answer feels uncertain, something shifts. Not into admiration, but into distance. Quiet, subtle distance. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but reveals itself in absence, in tone, in hesitation, in what is no longer said. Because admiration requires something difficult. It requires humility, the ability to recognize someone else's progress without turning it into a reflection of your own. And that isn't easy. So instead, the mind looks for balance. It questions, it minimizes, it reframes, not to harm, but to protect something. An image, an identity, a sense of self. And this pattern doesn't stop there. It appears somewhere even more subtle, in the way people think. Because people like to believe their opinions are their own, that their beliefs are independent. But most of what we think is shaped by what surrounds us. Because for most of human history, belonging was survival. To be accepted was to be safe. And to be excluded was to be vulnerable. So the mind learned something simple. Stay aligned. Agree when necessary. Blend in when possible. Even if it means ignoring what you privately feel. And this is why standing apart feels so difficult. Not because people lack intelligence, but because they are responding to something deeper than logic. The need to belong. And this need doesn't just shape opinions. It shapes behavior, relationships, decisions, even morality. Because what is considered right is often what is accepted, not what is true. And this leads to something even more uncomfortable. Kindness is not always seen as strength. In theory, it is valued. But in practice, it changes over time. Because when something is always given, it begins to disappear. Not physically, but perceptually. What was once noticed becomes expected. And what is expected loses its impact until it is no longer recognized at all. This is why pressure reveals character. Not because it creates something new, but because it removes the space to perform. Under pressure, there is no time to choose how you appear, only how you act. And action is always honest. Not intentionally, but inevitably. And perhaps the most difficult part of all is that most people never fully see this in themselves, not because they can't, but because it requires something uncomfortable. Reflection. The willingness to question your own patterns, to recognize your own contradictions, to see the parts you would rather ignore. And most people don't stay in that space for long. They move, they react, they justify, and then they continue. And this is how patterns repeat. Not because people choose them consciously, but because they are never fully seen. Human nature is not entirely dark, nor is it entirely good. It is something far more complex. A balance between instinct and intention, self-interest and empathy, awareness and avoidance. And understanding this doesn't make the world more cynical. It makes it clearer. Because when you stop expecting people to behave in ideal ways, you begin to understand them as they are. And that understanding changes how you move through the world, with less confusion, less surprise, and more awareness. Because the goal is not to judge human nature. It is to see it clearly. And once you see it, you begin to recognize it everywhere, not just in others, but in yourself. And once you recognize it, you can't unsee it.